Have you ever watched someone smile while their world is falling apart? Have you ever wondered what secrets hide behind the polished doors of the places you trust? Picture this, a woman standing in the shadows of her own empire, wearing a disguise not to hide from strangers, but to finally see the truth she's been avoiding for years. A CEO who built her dreams into gleaming restaurants across the country, now walking through her own front door as nobody, ready to witness what happens when she's not in the room. And what she discovers in the next few hours won't just change her life. It will shatter everything she thought success meant. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, because what you're about to hear is a story about transformation that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Trust me, you'll want to be part of this community where stories don't just entertain, they change how you see the world. The evening air carried the scent of autumn rain as Vivian Cross stood across the street from the canvas room, watching warm light spill through floor-to-ceiling windows onto the sidewalk. She was 43 years old, though most people said she looked younger, with dark hair threaded with just enough silver to suggest wisdom rather than age. Tonight that hair was pulled into a messy bun, loose strands falling around her face in a way that felt deliberately careless. She wore faded jeans with a small tear at the knee, an oversized cream cardigan that had seen better days, and tortoiseshell glasses she didn't actually need. On her feet, worn canvas sneakers replaced the Italian leather heels she usually wore. To anyone watching, she looked like a tired professional grabbing dinner after a long shift. Maybe a teacher, maybe a social worker. Definitely not the woman who owned this restaurant and 17 others just like it. Vivian took a breath, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. This was her flagship location, the first canvas room she'd opened 8 years ago, when she'd finally secured enough investment to turn her culinary dreams into brick-and-mortar reality. She remembered standing in this exact spot back then, watching contractors hang the sign with her chosen name, feeling like she was watching her soul take physical form. The canvas room, a place where food would be art, and every guest would feel like they'd stepped into something special, something meaningful. Now she was about to walk in as a stranger, and the thought terrified her. It had started 3 weeks ago with an accident, the kind of small mistake that cracks open entire worlds. Vivian had been working late in her downtown office, the kind of sterile glass tower that made her feel important and empty in equal measure. She'd reached for her phone to check her personal email and grabbed her assistant's tablet instead. The screen had been opened to a website called Honest Kitchen Confessions, some kind of anonymous forum where restaurant workers shared their experiences. And there, third post from the top, she'd seen it. The canvas room, flagship location, subject line in all caps, beautiful prison. She should have closed the tablet. She should have respected her assistant's privacy. She should have done a lot of things. Instead, she'd read every word. The post described a workplace that looked perfect on the surface, Instagram-worthy dishes and Edison bulb ambiance and smiling managers who preached family values at pre-shift meetings. But underneath, the anonymous poster claimed, people were drowning. Wages that sounded competitive on paper but left employees choosing between rent and food. Schedules that changed with 48 hours notice, making second jobs impossible. A health insurance plan with deductibles so high that nobody actually used it. And management that only cared about table turnover rates and online reviews, never about the human cost of maintaining the illusion of effortless hospitality. The post had ended with a line that had been echoing in Vivian's head for weeks. Someone built a beautiful restaurant and forgot to leave room for the people inside it to breathe. She'd barely slept since reading those words. At first, she'd been defensive, angry even. Her managers sent glowing reports. Employee satisfaction surveys came back positive. She paid above minimum wage, offered benefits, created a workplace culture that had been featured in Restaurant Hospitality magazine as innovative and employee-forward. How dare some anonymous coward trash her life's work without having the courage to speak to her directly? But the anger had faded into something worse. Doubt. Because deep down, in the part of herself she'd been ignoring for months, maybe years, she knew something was wrong. She knew because food didn't excite her anymore. She knew because she couldn't remember the last time she'd actually cooked something, really cooked, with her hands in dough and her mind lost in the alchemy of flavors. She knew because she'd been having panic attacks in her car before board meetings, hyperventilating in parking garages while trying to remember why any of this mattered. She'd built an empire. She'd achieved everything she'd dreamed of back when she was a line cook, working doubles to afford culinary school. She had money, respect, influence, awards. Last year, she'd been a guest judge on a cooking competition show. 2 years ago, James Beard's semi-finalist for Restaurateur of the Year. Her face had been on magazine covers with headlines like "Visionary Chef Redefines Farm to Table" and "The Woman Who Made Fine Dining Accessible," and she felt absolutely nothing. Just a hollow space where passion used to live, and a growing suspicion that she traded her soul for success without noticing the exact moment the deal went through. So she decided to do something reckless. She would go undercover in her own restaurant, unannounced, unrecognized. She would see what really happened when Vivian Cross wasn't in the building. She would find out if that anonymous post was an outlier from one disgruntled employee, or if it was the truth she'd been too insulated to see. Now here she was, standing across the street, scared of what she might discover in the place she'd created. Vivian crossed the street and pushed through the heavy wooden door. Immediately, she was enveloped in warmth and the scent of roasting garlic, fresh bread, and the particular sweetness of caramelizing onions. The host stand was made from reclaimed barn wood, one of the signature design elements she'd insisted on in every location. Above it, Edison bulbs hung at varying heights, casting pools of amber light. To her left, the open kitchen gleamed with stainless steel and movement, chefs calling orders and expediting plates with the controlled chaos she'd always found beautiful. To her right, the dining room stretched toward windows that looked out onto a small courtyard where they grew herbs in raised beds. Even this late in the season, everything looked exactly as it should, exactly as she'd designed it. Perfect. The host, a young man with styled hair and a bright smile, glanced up from his podium. His eyes passed over her without recognition, which was exactly what she'd hoped for. "Good evening," he said, his voice pleasant but with an undertone of something else. Impatience, maybe, or fatigue disguised as professionalism. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," Vivian said, making her voice softer, less assured than her normal speaking tone. "Just me. Is there any availability?" The host's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let me check." He tapped on his tablet, and Vivian noticed his jaw clench. "We have a table available, but I'll need to seat you in section 3. It's toward the back." "That's fine," Vivian said. "Thank you." He gathered a menu and led her through the dining room without another word. As they walked, Vivian's trained eye catalogued everything. A foretop near the window, where 2 couples laughed over shared appetizers. An elderly man dining alone, reading a hardcover book propped against a wine bottle. A business dinner in progress, 3 people in suits leaning over contracts and salads. Everyone looked content. Everyone looked like they were having exactly the experience she'd intended to create. But she also noticed other things. The way servers moved through the room with mechanical efficiency, smiles that engaged their mouths but not their eyes, the slight tension in the shoulders of a woman carrying a tray of entrees, her grip just a little too tight. The busser who cleared a table with movements that suggested he'd done this exact task 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more, world without end. The host seated her at a small 2-top near the wall, placed the menu in front of her with a rehearsed gesture, and said, "Your server will be right with you." Then he was gone, moving back through the dining room at a pace that suggested he had somewhere more important to be. Vivian opened the menu, though she'd written every description on it. Roasted beet salad with goat cheese and pistachio, pan-seared salmon with lemon caper butter, braised short rib with celery root puree. She'd developed these recipes herself, back when she still cooked, back when creating a new dish felt like writing poetry. Each ingredient a carefully chosen word, the final plate a complete thought. Now they were just items on a menu, products to be replicated across 18 locations with consistent portion sizes and plating guidelines detailed in a manual she'd never actually read all the way through. She was about to close the menu when movement caught her eye. A server approaching her table, notepad in hand. The same professional smile Vivian had seen on a dozen faces tonight. But there was something different about this one, something in the eyes that looked less like fatigue and more like barely controlled devastation. The server was young, maybe 24, with dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail and eyes that were striking even from a distance, large and expressive and currently red-rimmed in a way that makeup couldn't quite hide. She wore the standard canvas room server uniform, black button-down shirt and dark jeans, a canvas apron tied at the waist with the restaurant's logo embroidered in simple thread. Her name tag said Jade. She reached Vivian's table, and the smile intensified, became almost painfully bright. "Good evening," she said, her voice wavering just slightly on the second word. "Welcome to the canvas room. My name is Jade, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" Vivian looked at her, really looked, and saw what she'd been trained to see from years in kitchens where reading people was survival. This woman was holding herself together with pure will. Her hands trembled as she held the notepad. Her breathing was slightly too fast. And her eyes, God, her eyes looked like someone had reached in and scooped out everything soft, leaving only the shell of professional competence. "Just water for now," Vivian said gently. "Thank you." "Of course," Jade said. "I'll give you a few minutes to look over the menu." She turned to leave, and Vivian saw her free hand go to her face, a quick swipe at the corner of her eye, a gesture so fast most people would miss it. But Vivian caught it. Vivian saw. She watched Jade move to the server station, watched her pour water from a pitcher with hands that shook enough to make the liquid tremble, watched her take a breath that made her shoulders rise and fall with effort, watched her paste that smile back on and carry the water glass back to the table, setting it down with exaggerated care. "Here you go," Jade said. "Have you had a chance to decide? Or would you like a few more minutes?" "A few more minutes would be great," Vivian said, still using that soft voice, the one that invited confidence rather than commanded attention. Jade nodded and started to turn away, but before she could take a step, a voice rang out from a nearby table. "Excuse me, miss. We've been waiting for our appetizers for 20 minutes. This is unacceptable." Vivian turned to see a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, glaring at Jade with a kind of entitled irritation that suggested he'd never worked a service job in his life. His companion, a woman dripping with jewelry, nodded in agreement. Jade's face went pale. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me check with the kitchen right away. I apologize for the delay." "You apologize," the man said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But that doesn't solve the problem, does it? We have theater tickets. We can't sit here all night waiting for food that should have been out 15 minutes ago." "I understand completely," Jade said, and Vivian could hear the strain in her voice, the effort it took to stay calm and professional. "I'll make sure it's expedited immediately and speak with my manager about comping the appetizer for the inconvenience." "You'll speak with your manager," the man repeated mockingly. "How about you just do your job competently in the first place?" Something flickered across Jade's face, something dangerous and hurt and barely contained, but she swallowed it down, nodded once, and said, "I'll be right back with an update," in a voice that had gone completely flat. She walked toward the kitchen with quick, rigid steps, and Vivian felt anger rise in her chest. She knew kitchen timing issues happened. She knew 20 minutes wasn't actually that long for appetizers during a busy service. She knew this man was being unreasonable, cruel even, and she knew that Jade was absorbing his cruelty with her body, taking the hit so the restaurant's reputation stayed pristine. This was her fault. Vivian had created a culture where the customer was always right, where servers were expected to absorb abuse with a smile, where complaints were met with comps and apologies rather than boundaries. She'd never thought about what that cost the people doing the absorbing. Jade emerged from the kitchen 2 minutes later carrying a plate of charcuterie, her face completely blank now, emptied of everything. She delivered it to the angry man's table with mechanical politeness, endured his dismissive grunt of acknowledgement, and turned away without the smile this time. And as she turned, Vivian saw it clearly. A tear, sliding down her cheek, quickly wiped away with the back of her hand. Then Jade did something that made Vivian's heart clench. She walked quickly toward the back of the restaurant, past the restrooms, toward the service hallway that led to the employee area. Her pace increased with each step, and by the time she disappeared through the door, she was almost running. Vivian sat there for a moment, her mind racing. Every business instinct told her to stay in her seat, to not get involved, to let management handle whatever was happening. She was undercover for a reason. Getting involved would blow her cover and defeat the purpose. But there was another voice, quieter and deeper, that said something different. That voice said she'd spent too many years prioritizing business over humanity. That voice said a woman was falling apart in a restaurant, and doing nothing made her complicit. That voice said that sometimes the right thing and the smart thing weren't the same, and you had to choose. Vivian stood up. She left her jacket on the chair to mark her table as occupied and walked toward the service hallway, her heart pounding. A few diners glanced at her curiously, but most were absorbed in their meals, their conversations, their own small worlds. She pushed through the door marked staff only and found herself in a dimly lit corridor that smelled like industrial cleaner and fryer oil. At first, she didn't see anyone. Then she heard it. Quiet, muffled sobbing coming from the left, near the employee lockers. Vivian moved toward the sound and found Jade sitting on the floor, her back against a locker, her knees pulled to her chest, crying with the kind of desperate, silent intensity of someone who'd been holding it in too long. Vivian's first instinct was to announce herself, to say something, but she stopped, just watching for a moment, and felt something crack open in her chest. This wasn't an employee having a bad shift. This was a human being breaking under weight no one should carry alone, and Vivian had built the system that put that weight on her shoulders. She moved closer, her footsteps soft, and knelt down a few feet away from Jade, not wanting to startle her or invade her space. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to intrude, but I couldn't walk away either. You look like you're carrying something alone. Sometimes it helps to share, even with a stranger." Jade's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and embarrassment. She scrambled to wipe her face, to compose herself, to put the professional mask back on. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I'll be back on the floor in just a minute. Please don't tell my manager. I just needed a second. I'm fine, really." "You don't look fine," Vivian said gently. "You look like the world is on your shoulders, and you're trying to hold it up alone." Jade laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "You don't want to hear my problems. You came here for a nice dinner, not to play therapist to your server." Vivian settled more comfortably on the floor, leaning back against the wall opposite Jade. "Maybe I came here for exactly this. Maybe we spend so much time pretending everything is fine that we forget how to be human with each other." Jade stared at her, confusion and suspicion and desperate hope all flickering across her face. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "Right now," Vivian said, "I'm just someone who recognizes what breaking looks like, someone who thinks you shouldn't have to do it alone." And something in those words, or maybe in Vivian's voice, or maybe just in the fact that someone had noticed and cared, made Jade's defenses crumble completely. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks and she covered her face with her hands. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't keep pretending I'm okay when everything is falling apart. I can't keep smiling at people who treat me like I'm invisible or stupid or less than human. I can't keep working myself to death and still not have enough. I just can't." The words came out in a rush, like a dam breaking, and once they started, Jade couldn't seem to stop. "I work here 5 nights a week," she said. "Then I stock shelves at a 24-hour grocery from midnight to 6 in the morning 3 days a week. On weekends I pick up catering shifts wherever I can get them. I'm working 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, and I still can't make ends meet. Do you know what that feels like? To destroy your body, to give up sleep and any kind of life, and still be drowning." Vivian felt each word like a physical blow. "Why?" she asked softly. "What are you trying to cover?" Jade lowered her hands and looked directly at Vivian, her eyes red and raw but also fierce with a kind of desperate pride. "My brother, Micah, he's 16. Our mom died 8 months ago from pancreatic cancer. It was fast and awful, and by the time they caught it, there was nothing anyone could do. She was gone 6 weeks after diagnosis." "I'm so sorry," Vivian said, and meant it with everything in her. "Our dad left when Micah was 3, Jade continued. "Just walked out one day, and we never heard from him again. So it was always just me, Micah, and Mom. And when she died, I became his legal guardian. I'm 24 years old, and I'm raising a teenager by myself, trying to keep him in school, trying to give him some kind of normal life when nothing is normal anymore." She wiped her eyes again, angry now at her own tears. Mom had some life insurance, but it barely covered the funeral. And she had medical bills, so many medical bills. Even with insurance, cancer treatment is insanely expensive. We're drowning in debt, $47,000, and climbing because of interest. I'm on a payment plan, but I can barely keep up. Vivian's throat tightened. "That's an impossible burden." "It gets better," Jade said with bitter sarcasm. "This morning, I got an eviction notice. We're 3 months behind on rent. I have 2 weeks to come up with $3,200 or we're homeless. $3,200. Do you know how insurmountable that feels when you're already working every hour God gives you? Where will you go? Vivian asked. I have no idea, Jade whispered. I've been trying to figure that out all day. My car maybe, until I can find something. But Micah, he can't live in a car. He's supposed to be worrying about homework and friends and college applications, not where he's going to sleep. What about other family? Vivian asked. Friends? Jade shook her head. Mom's parents are dead. Dad's family wants nothing to do with us. I have friends, but they're all in the same boat I am, barely making it themselves. I can't ask them to take in 2 more people. And you've been carrying all of this while serving tables and pretending to be cheerful, Vivian said. Not a question, but a statement of horrified realization. What choice do I have? Jade said. If I break down at work, I get fired. If I get fired, I lose what little income I have. So I smile and I take orders and I pretend that man yelling at me about appetizers is the biggest problem in my world, when really I'm trying to figure out how to keep my brother fed and in school and safe. She pulled her knees tighter to her chest. The worst part is Micah. He's so talented. He plays piano and he's brilliant at it, like genuinely gifted. His music teacher says with proper training, he could get into a conservatory, maybe even with a scholarship. But he needs private lessons we can't afford. He needs opportunities I can't give him. And lately he's been skipping school, getting in trouble, and I know it's because I'm never home. I'm always working. He's raising himself, and he's angry and hurt, and I don't know how to fix it. Her voice cracked completely. I'm failing him. I'm failing my mom's memory. I'm failing at everything that matters, and I don't know how to make it better. Vivian sat in the silence that followed, feeling the weight of Jade's story settle over her like a heavy blanket. This wasn't abstract poverty or theoretical systemic failure. This was a real person, with a name and a face and a brother who played piano, being crushed by circumstances that should never exist in a wealthy country, in a successful city, in a world with so many resources. And this person worked for her, served food in her restaurant, smiled at her customers, made her money, and Vivian hadn't known, hadn't asked, hadn't created any system to catch someone falling through the cracks this catastrophically. Listen to me, Vivian said, her voice steady despite the emotion roiling in her chest. You're not failing. You're fighting, and those are completely different things. Fighting sometimes looks like falling apart in a hallway. Fighting sometimes looks like crying when you can't hold it anymore. That's not weakness. That's being human under inhuman pressure. Jade looked at her with desperate hope. But what do I do? How do I keep fighting when I'm so tired I can barely think straight? When I haven't eaten a real meal in days because I give all my food to Micah? When I can't remember the last time I slept more than 3 hours? Vivian felt something shift inside her, a decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. She'd come here to observe, to understand, to gather information. But information was useless without action. And here, right in front of her, was a person who needed help, not in the abstract future, but right now, immediately, urgently. What if I told you, Vivian said slowly, that you're not as alone as you feel? What if I told you that sometimes help comes from unexpected places? Jade frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Vivian said, choosing her words carefully, because she still wasn't ready to reveal who she was. Not yet. Not until she understood the full scope of what was happening here. I mean that I'm not just a customer who wandered back here by accident. I came here tonight specifically to understand what really happens in this place. And what I'm seeing breaks my heart. I don't understand, Jade said. You don't need to. Not yet, Vivian replied. But I need you to trust me for a moment. Can you do that? Jade hesitated, then nodded slowly. Good, Vivian said. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you my phone number. Tomorrow, I want you to call me. We're going to talk about your rent and Micah's piano lessons and the medical debt and all of it. We're going to figure this out together. Why would you do that? Jade asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. You don't even know me. People don't just solve other people's problems out of nowhere. You're right, Vivian said. They don't, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've all gotten so used to walking past each other's pain that we've forgotten we're allowed to stop. We're allowed to help. We're allowed to see someone drowning and throw them a rope. But why me? Jade pressed. There are lots of people struggling. Why would a stranger care about me specifically? Because I'm not really a stranger, Vivian said. Because your story is my responsibility in ways you don't understand yet. And because if I walk away from you right now, I'm walking away from any claim I have to being a decent human being. Now, before you think this story is too good to be true, before you wonder if real change is even possible, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next isn't just about one person helping another. It's about what happens when we stop accepting broken systems and start building something better. And you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Jade was staring at Vivian with an expression caught between hope and disbelief. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, Vivian said. Just promise me you'll call tomorrow. Can you do that? After a long moment, Jade nodded. Okay, yes. I'll call. Good, Vivian said. Now, do you need a few more minutes, or do you have to get back out there? I should go back, Jade said, wiping her face one more time. I've already been gone too long. They stood together, and Vivian reached out, gently touching Jade's shoulder. You're stronger than you know. Remember that. Jade's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she blinked them back and managed a small, real smile. Thank you for seeing me, for caring. I didn't know how much I needed someone to just notice. I see you, Vivian said, and I promise we're going to make this better. They walked back toward the dining room together, Jade heading to the server station to check on her tables, Vivian returning to her seat where her water glass still sat, condensation sliding down the sides. She sat down and picked up the menu again, but she couldn't focus on the words. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding with the weight of what she'd just learned. This wasn't an isolated incident. She knew that with sudden, awful certainty. Jade's story was probably one of many, hidden behind professional smiles and rehearsed greetings, invisible to customers who just wanted a nice meal, and to managers who just wanted smooth service, and to owners who just wanted good numbers. To owners like her. Vivian pulled out her phone and opened a new note. She started typing, documenting everything she'd seen and heard, questions she needed answered, systems she needed to investigate. How many other employees were working multiple jobs? How many were one emergency away from homelessness? How many were choosing between food and medicine, between rent and electricity? How many were suffering in silence because asking for help felt like admitting failure? Jade returned to her table a few minutes later, her face cleaned up, her professional mask back in place, but somehow different now. There was a fragility to it, an acknowledgement that Vivian had seen behind it, and there was no point pretending otherwise. Are you ready to order? She asked quietly. The salmon, Vivian said. And Jade? You're going to be okay. I mean that. Jade's eyes glistened, but she blinked rapidly and nodded. Thank you, she whispered. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen, her steps a little steadier than before. Vivian sat there, surrounded by the warm ambiance and pleasant murmur of satisfied diners, and felt the full weight of her ignorance crash over her. She'd built this beautiful thing, this successful empire, and she'd never once asked what it cost the people who made it run. She'd measured success in revenue and reviews and awards, never in whether her employees could afford to eat the food they served or live in the neighborhoods where they worked. She thought about her own journey, growing up with a single mother who worked as a line cook at a diner, who came home every night smelling like fryer grease, with feet so swollen she could barely walk. Vivian had watched her mother sacrifice everything to give her daughter opportunities she'd never had, had watched her pour her creativity into daily specials that regular customers loved, dreaming of someday opening her own place, but never having the capital or connections to make it happen. When Vivian had finally made it, when she'd gone to culinary school on scholarships and worked her way up from prep cook to sous chef to head chef to owner, she'd promised herself she'd never forget where she came from. She'd never forget what it felt like to be overlooked, underpaid, undervalued. She'd build something different, something better. But somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten. The demands of scaling, of pleasing investors, of maintaining quality across multiple locations, of competing in a brutal industry had slowly shifted her focus from people to metrics. She'd started seeing employees as labor costs rather than humans, started prioritizing efficiency over dignity, started accepting industry norms without questioning whether those norms were destroying lives. She'd become exactly what she'd sworn she'd never be, The salmon arrived, perfectly plated with asparagus and fingerling potatoes. A delicate lemon butter sauce pooled artfully on the plate. It looked exactly as it should, exactly as she'd designed it to look. Vivian picked up her fork and took a bite. The fish was cooked flawlessly, the seasoning balanced, the textures complementary. By every objective measure, it was excellent, and it tasted like ash in her mouth. Because what did it matter that the salmon was perfect when the person who served it couldn't afford to eat? What did it matter that the plating was beautiful when the hands that arranged it were shaking from exhaustion and hunger and fear? What did it matter that she created an aesthetic experience when the humans creating it were being consumed by the very system she'd built? Vivian ate mechanically, documenting more observations in her phone. A busser who moved too quickly, almost frantic in his efficiency. A server who flinched when a manager spoke to her. The way the kitchen staff visible through the open window looked tense, stressed, moving with a kind of desperate speed that suggested they were understaffed and overwhelmed. She paid attention to the other diners too, the ones enjoying their meals with no idea what was happening behind the scenes. They laughed and talked and took photos of their food for social media. They sent back dishes that weren't quite right and accepted the comped replacements with entitled nods. They left tips that probably felt generous to them, but that Vivian now realized wouldn't come close to covering the basic cost of survival in this expensive city. When Jade brought the check, Vivian looked at the total. $38 for the salmon, $2 for the water. She pulled out $60 in cash and handed it to Jade. "Keep the change," she said. Jade's eyes widened. "That's too much." "No," Vivian said quietly. "It's nowhere near enough, but it's what I have on me right now." "Thank you," Jade whispered, clutching the money like it was a lifeline. "And thank you for earlier, for listening, for caring. You have no idea what that meant to me." "I think I'm starting to," Vivian said. "Remember, call me tomorrow." "I will," Jade promised. Vivian walked out of the canvas room into the cool evening air, her mind reeling. She stood on the sidewalk, looking back at the warm glow of the windows, the elegant sign, the beautiful facade. From out here, it looked perfect. It looked like exactly what she'd intended to create, a place where people could escape the harsh world for a few hours and experience something lovely. But now she knew the truth. The escape was an illusion built on the backs of people who couldn't escape their own lives, people who created beauty for others while their own lives fell apart. And she'd built it. This was her creation, her responsibility, her failure. Vivian walked to her car, a sleek luxury sedan parked 3 blocks away where it wouldn't be noticed, and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off. She pulled out her phone and stared at the notes she'd taken, hundreds of words documenting what she'd seen. Then she opened a new note and titled it, "What I'm Going to Do About It." She sat there for 20 minutes, then 30, then an hour, typing and deleting and retyping, trying to figure out how to fix something so fundamentally broken. The obvious answer was money. Pay people more. But it wasn't that simple, was it? If she raised wages significantly at one location, the others would hear about it and demand the same. If she did it across all locations, her investors would revolt. Her profit margins would shrink. She might have to close locations, which would put people out of work entirely. But what was the alternative? Keep things as they were, keep succeeding, while the people who made that success possible were destroyed by it? No, that wasn't acceptable. She'd have to find another way. She'd have to be willing to make less profit, to fight with investors, to risk everything she'd built. Because what was the point of building an empire if the foundation was human suffering? Vivian started the engine and drove home to her penthouse apartment, the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines, all clean lines and expensive minimalism. She walked in and looked around at the evidence of her success. Original artwork on the walls, designer furniture, a kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances that she never used because she was always working or too tired to cook, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the glittering city below. It felt like a mausoleum, beautiful and cold and empty. She poured herself a glass of wine, expensive Cabernet from a vineyard she'd visited in Napa, and sat by the window, looking out at the lights. Somewhere down there, Jade was probably finishing her shift at the canvas room, then driving to the grocery store to stock shelves through the night. Somewhere down there, Jade's brother Micah was probably alone in an apartment they were about to lose. Maybe doing homework, maybe playing piano, maybe just trying to understand why life had to be this hard. Somewhere down there, Dozens or maybe hundreds of people were living this same story, working themselves to death in restaurants and stores and offices, invisible to the people they served, drowning quietly while the world went on around them. Vivian had spent years trying to get to the top, and now that she was here, she could finally see how many people the climb had crushed, including herself. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she worked, researching wage standards and cost of living calculations and benefit structures and everything she should have known before now. She made spreadsheets, ran numbers, modeled different scenarios. She drafted emails to her management team and her investors and her board. She planned and plotted and tried to figure out how to turn a ship this big without capsizing it entirely. By the time dawn broke, painting her expensive view in shades of pink and gold, Vivian had the outline of a plan. It was radical. It was risky. It would probably cost her relationships with investors and board members who prioritized profit over people. It might even cost her the empire she'd built. But it was right. And for the first time in years, doing something right felt more important than doing something successful. Her phone rang at 9 in the morning, a number she didn't recognize. She answered on the second ring. "Hello? Hi, this is Jade. From last night. You said to call." The voice was hesitant, like she still couldn't quite believe this was real. "Jade," Vivian said warmly, "I'm so glad you called. Do you have some time to talk? Can we meet somewhere?" "I have a couple hours before my shift," Jade said. "There's a coffee shop near my apartment. It's nothing fancy, but—" "Perfect," Vivian interrupted. "Text me the address. I'll be there in 30 minutes. "Okay," Jade said, sounding surprised. "Okay, I'll see you soon." Vivian hung up and looked at herself in the mirror. She still wore the disguise from last night, having been too consumed with work to change. She looked tired, older than her 43 years, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. But there was something else there too, a light in her eyes that had been missing. Purpose, direction, the feeling of moving toward something that mattered rather than just away from emptiness. She grabbed her bag and headed out, taking the elevator down from her penthouse to the parking garage. As she drove through morning traffic toward the address Jade had texted, she felt nervous in a way she hadn't felt in years. This mattered. This conversation could change everything. The coffee shop was exactly what Jade had described. Nothing fancy, a small independent place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, the kind of spot that probably barely broke even, but served as a community gathering space. Vivian walked in and found Jade sitting at a corner table, and with her was a teenage boy who could only be Micah. Vivian approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. Jade stood up, awkward and uncertain, and gestured to her brother. "This is Micah. I hope it's okay that I brought him. I didn't have anywhere else for him to be, and I thought maybe you'd want to meet him." "I absolutely want to meet him," Vivian said, reaching out to shake Micah's hand. He took it warily, his eyes guarded in a way that broke her heart. This kid had learned not to trust easily, and who could blame him? They sat down together, and Vivian ordered coffee for herself and insisted on buying them both breakfast. Jade started to protest, but Vivian cut her off gently. "Please, let me do this small thing." When the food arrived, Vivian watched Micah eat with the focused intensity of someone who was genuinely hungry, and she had to look away to keep her composure. 16 years old and hungry. In a city full of expensive restaurants where people dropped $100 on dinner without thinking, the wrongness of it was overwhelming. "So," Jade said, picking at her muffin nervously, "you said we'd talk about everything. I've been trying to figure out who you are all night. You're not just a random customer, are you?" "No," Vivian said, "I'm not, and I think it's time I was honest with you about who I am and why I was at the restaurant last night." She took a breath, knowing this was the moment of truth. "My name is Vivian Cross. I own the canvas room, all of them. I'm the CEO of the company." Jade's face went white. She set down her muffin with shaking hands. "You're what?" "I'm your boss," Vivian said quietly. "Or several levels up from your direct boss anyway. I went to the restaurant last night in disguise because I needed to see what really happens there, what really goes on when I'm not around. And what I found was so much worse than I imagined." Jade stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You lied to me. You let me spill my entire life to you, and you were my boss the whole time?" Oh my God. I'm going to be fired, aren't I? This was some kind of test, and I failed, and now, Jade, Vivian interrupted firmly. Standing as well. Stop. Please, sit down. You're not being fired. This isn't a trick or a test. Please, just sit down and let me explain. Micah tugged on his sister's sleeve. Jade, listen to her. Jade sat slowly, her eyes brimming with tears of humiliation and anger. How could you? Because I knew if I showed up as myself, I'd never see the truth, Vivian said. Everyone would put on a show. Everything would look perfect. And I needed to see what was really happening, because I suspected things were very wrong. I read something, an anonymous post online, that made me question everything I thought I knew about my own company. She leaned forward, her voice intense, and I was right to be worried. What you told me last night, Jade, what you're living through, that's not an isolated incident. That's a systemic failure, and it's my failure. I built a system that looks beautiful on the outside, while destroying people on the inside. I did that, me, and now I have to fix it. Jade wiped her eyes angrily. You can't fix it. You can't fix that I'm drowning in debt and about to be homeless. You can't fix that my brother is suffering and I can't help him. You can't just throw money at me and make it all go away. Actually, Vivian said quietly, I can not just throw money, but yes, money is part of the solution. And I know that makes you uncomfortable. I know it feels like charity, and you don't want to be a charity case. But this isn't charity, Jade. This is restitution. What does that mean? Micah asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was deeper than Vivian expected, already changing into a young man's voice. It means, Vivian said, looking at him directly, that your sister has been underpaid for her labor. She's been working for me in a system I created that doesn't value her fairly, so paying her what she's actually worth, what she should have been earning all along. That's not charity. That's just correcting an injustice. She turned back to Jade. Here's what I'm proposing. Actually, here's what I'm stating. I'm going to pay your back rent and your medical debt. Today, right now, consider it back pay for all the hours you've worked for less than you deserved. That's almost $50,000, Jade whispered. You can't just... I can, and I will, Vivian said. But that's just the beginning. I don't want to just solve your immediate crisis and send you back to the same broken system. I want to offer you something bigger. She pulled a folder from her bag, papers she'd printed that morning before leaving her apartment. I'm creating a new position in my company, Director of Employee Wellness. The job is to help me rebuild this entire organization from the ground up, focusing on the people who make it work. I need someone who understands what it's like to be on the other side of my policies. Someone who can tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Someone who cares about people more than profit. Vivian slid the folder across the table. I want you to take that job, Jade. Salary is $75,000 a year with full benefits, real benefits with low deductibles and mental health coverage and all the things that actually matter. You'll work directly with me to audit every location, talk to every employee, and help me understand how to make this company something we can both be proud of. Jade stared at the folder like it might explode. I don't have a college degree. I don't have any business experience. I'm a waitress. You're a survivor, Vivian corrected. You're someone who's been living the reality that I need to understand. You're exactly who I need for this role. And yes, there will be a learning curve. Yes, I'll provide training and support, but your lived experience is more valuable than any business degree. What about Micah? Jade asked, her voice shaking. What about his piano lessons? Vivian turned to Micah. Your sister tells me you're talented. Is that true? Micah shrugged, trying to look indifferent, but Vivian could see the hunger in his eyes. I'm okay, I guess. He's incredible, Jade said fiercely. He's better than okay. He could be great if he had the chance. Then let's give him the chance, Vivian said. I know a piano teacher, one of the best in the city. She's a friend, and she owes me a favor. I'll set up a meeting. If she agrees you have talent worth developing, she'll take you on. I'll cover the lessons. Why are you doing this? Micah asked, and there was a challenge in his voice, a refusal to simply accept good fortune without understanding it. What do you get out of it? Vivian considered the question seriously. Honestly, I get to live with myself. I get to look in the mirror and not see someone who destroys lives in pursuit of profit. I get to remember why I started cooking in the first place, which was because food is supposed to bring people together, supposed to nourish and sustain and create joy. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. You two are helping me remember. She looked between them. But if we're being completely honest, I'm also doing this because it's right, because I have the resources to help, and therefore the responsibility to help, because your suffering is partly my fault, and I need to take ownership of that. Does that make sense? Jade was crying now, really crying, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to say. This is too much. This is... Say yes. Vivian interrupted gently. Say you'll take the job. Say you'll let me help. Say we can work together to make something better. Jade looked at her brother. Micah, what do you think? The teenager looked at Vivian with eyes much older than 16. I think we don't have a lot of other options. I think if she's for real, this could change everything. And I think, his voice cracked slightly, I think maybe Mom sent her. Maybe this is what people mean when they talk about answered prayers. Vivian felt tears prick her own eyes. I don't know about prayers, but I know I was meant to be in that restaurant last night. I know I was meant to see you, Jade. And I know we're meant to do something meaningful together. Jade wiped her face and took a shaky breath. Okay, yes, I'll take the job. I'll help you. And thank you. Thank you so much. I don't have words for what this means. You don't need words, Vivian said. You just need to show up honestly and help me see what I've been missing. Can you do that? I can, Jade said with growing confidence. I can absolutely do that. Good, Vivian said. Then let's get started. And here's what I need you to understand. Watching this story unfold, this isn't a fairy tale. This is about what happens when people choose to see each other's humanity instead of looking away, when those with power decide to use it for something besides accumulation. So if this story is moving you, if you're feeling something shift in your own heart, I want you to drop a comment below. Tell me about a time someone truly saw you when you felt invisible. Tell me your story, because that's how we build community. That's how we remember we're not alone. And make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next is where the real transformation begins. Over the next 3 days, Vivian moved with focused intensity. She met with her accountant and authorized immediate payments for Jade's rent and medical debt, watching the relief flood Jade's face when she confirmed the money had been transferred. She connected Micah with her piano teacher friend, a woman named Margaret Chen, who'd performed at Carnegie Hall and now taught select students. Margaret met with Micah and called Vivian afterward, her voice thick with emotion. This boy is extraordinary, Margaret said, raw and untrained in some ways. But the feeling he brings to the music, Vivian, it's rare. It's the kind of talent that deserves to be developed. I'll take him on, and I won't charge you. This is my contribution to something that matters. But Vivian insisted on paying anyway, knowing that artists also deserve to be compensated for their work, and Margaret eventually accepted with grace. Vivian also began the larger investigation, the one that would reshape her entire company. She started by requesting detailed reports from all 18 Canvas Room locations. Not the usual reports about revenue and customer satisfaction, but new ones. She wanted to know the average hourly wage for each position, wanted to know employee turnover rates and exit interview summaries, wanted to know how many employees worked second jobs, how many had dependents, how many used the health insurance, how many had filed for bankruptcy in the last year. Her management team was confused by these requests. Her CFO sent a concerned email asking if there was a specific problem he should be aware of. Vivian replied simply, "Yes, there's a problem. I've been measuring the wrong things. We're going to fix that." While she waited for the data, Vivian did something she hadn't done in months. She cooked. She went into her pristine, barely used kitchen and made the kind of food she'd grown up with. Simple and nourishing. Chicken soup with vegetables from the farmer's market. Fresh bread that required her to work the dough with her hands until her shoulders ached. A berry pie with a crust made from her mother's recipe. It felt like coming home to herself. Her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten, that cooking was meditation and prayer and love made tangible. That food was meant to sustain not just bodies but souls. That there was holiness in the simple act of feeding people. She invited Jade and Micah to dinner at her apartment that weekend. They arrived looking overwhelmed by the space, clearly uncomfortable in such obvious luxury. But Vivian served the meal herself, dishing out soup and bread at her dining table while soft music played in the background, and gradually they relaxed. "This is incredible," Micah said after his second helping of soup. "Did you really make this?" "I really did," Vivian said, feeling pride that had nothing to do with Michelin stars or James Beard awards. "This is what I used to cook before I got successful. Before I forgot that the point was nourishment, not performance." "It tastes like home," Jade said softly. "Like my mom's cooking. Like safety." "That's the highest compliment you could give me," Vivian said, her throat tight. After dinner, Micah asked if he could play Vivian's piano, a gorgeous Steinway grand that she'd bought years ago and rarely touched. "Of course," she said, and watched as the teenager sat down and began to play. The music that poured from his fingers was devastating. He played Chopin, a nocturne in E-flat major, and he played it with such depth of feeling that Vivian felt tears stream down her face. This wasn't technical proficiency. This was soul speaking to soul, grief and beauty and desperate hope, all woven into melody. When he finished, the three of them sat in silence. Then Jade spoke, her voice choked with emotion. "That was Mom's favorite piece. He used to play it for her during treatment. It was the only thing that helped with the pain." Micah's shoulders were shaking. "I miss her so much," he whispered. "I try to be strong for Jade, but I miss her every second of every day." Vivian went to him, knelt beside the piano bench, and did something that surprised even herself. She pulled this grieving boy into a hug, holding him while he cried, and said, "You don't have to be strong. You're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to miss her. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Jade joined them, wrapping her arms around her brother from the other side, and the three of them stayed like that. Three people who'd been strangers days ago now connected by shared vulnerability and the tentative beginning of trust. That night marked a turning point. It was when Vivian stopped seeing this as a business problem to solve and started seeing it as a human calling to answer. When Jade stopped seeing Vivian as a powerful CEO and started seeing her as a person trying to make amends. When Micah stopped being quite so guarded and allowed himself to hope that maybe things could get better. The data from the 18 locations arrived 2 weeks later, and it was worse than Vivian had feared. Across all her restaurants, the average server made $32,000 a year in a city where the living wage was calculated at $48,000. Turnover was 67% annually, meaning most employees didn't last even 2 years. Only 18% of staff used the health insurance because the deductible was so high, it was essentially useless. Exit interviews revealed complaints about unpredictable scheduling, mandatory unpaid side work, managers who played favorites, and a general sense that employees were disposable. 53% of employees worked second jobs. 28% had filed for bankruptcy in the past 5 years. 41% had dependent children. 12% were supporting elderly parents. The numbers painted a picture of widespread struggle, of people working full-time for Vivian's company and still living in poverty. She called an emergency meeting of her leadership team, gathering her regional managers, her CFO, her head of HR, and her director of operations. They sat around the conference table in her downtown office, looking confused and slightly nervous. Vivian projected the data on the screen behind her. "I've spent the last 2 weeks investigating our employment practices," she said without preamble. "What I've found is unacceptable. We are a successful company built on the backs of people who can't afford to live. That ends now." The CFO, a man named Richard Stoltz, who'd been with the company since the beginning, frowned. "Vivian, our wages are competitive for the industry. We pay above minimum wage. We offer benefits. By industry standards, we're doing well." "Industry standards are a race to the bottom," Vivian shot back. "Just because everyone else treats their employees poorly doesn't mean we should. We're better than that. Or at least we're going to be." She advanced to the next slide, showing her proposed changes. "Effective immediately, we're implementing a living wage across all positions. That means starting pay for servers goes from $12 an hour to $21 an hour. Kitchen staff from 14 to 24. Management salaries increase proportionally." The room erupted. Richard actually stood up, his face red. "Vivian, that's a nearly 75% increase in labor costs. Our margins can't sustain that. We'll have to raise menu prices significantly, or..." "Then we raise prices," Vivian interrupted. And we're transparent about why. We tell our customers that they're paying more because we're paying our staff fairly. Most people will understand. The ones who don't, we don't need their business. This is financial suicide, Richard said. The board will never approve this. I'm the majority shareholder. Vivian reminded him coldly. The board advises. I decide. And I've decided that I'd rather run a smaller, less profitable company that treats people with dignity than a massive empire built on exploitation. She advanced to the next slide. We're also overhauling our health insurance, lower deductibles, better coverage, mental health services included. We're implementing a profit-sharing program so when the company does well, everyone benefits. We're creating an emergency fund that employees can access interest-free for unexpected expenses. We're establishing predictable scheduling with 2 weeks' notice minimum. And we're creating an employee wellness position at each location. Someone whose only job is to check in on staff and connect them with resources. The director of operations, a woman named Sandra Kim, spoke up cautiously. Vivian, I actually think some of these changes are overdue, but the scale and speed you're proposing, it's going to create chaos. We need time to implement properly. We don't have time, Vivian said. Every day we wait is another day people are suffering. We implement in phases over the next 60 days. That's the timeline. What if we lose locations? Richard demanded. What if this model isn't sustainable and we have to close restaurants? Then people lose their jobs entirely. Then we close locations, Vivian said. I'd rather have 10 restaurants that are ethical than 20% that exploit people. And honestly, if our business model only works by underpaying staff, then it deserves to fail. She looked around the table at her leadership team. I know this is a lot. I know it's scary, but I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to believe that we can build something better, something we can be proud of. And if you can't get on board with that, I understand, but I'll need your resignation because we're doing this with or without you. There was a long silence. Then Sandra spoke. I'm in. I've been uncomfortable with some of our practices for a while, but didn't feel like I had the authority to push for change. If you're creating that opening, I'm absolutely in. One by one, the others nodded agreement, even Richard, though his expression remained skeptical. I think you're making a mistake, he said, but I've been wrong before. I'll help you implement this, and I hope to God I'm wrong now too. Thank you, Vivian said, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Now let's get to work. The announcement went public 2 weeks later. Vivian crafted a video message that she posted to social media and sent to every news outlet she could think of. In it, she sat in a simple chair with no makeup, no professional lighting, just raw honesty. My name is Vivian Cross, she said to the camera. I'm the CEO and founder of the Canvas Room Restaurants, and I need to tell you about a failure. My failure. 2 weeks ago, I went undercover in one of my own restaurants because I'd heard rumors that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. What I found broke me. I found employees working multiple jobs and still unable to afford rent. I found people choosing between food and medicine. I found a young woman crying in an alley because she was working herself to death, and it still wasn't enough. She paused, letting that sink in. I built a successful company. I won awards and earned money and created beautiful spaces. But I did it by underpaying the people who made it possible. I measured the wrong things. I prioritized profit over people, and that was wrong. So, I'm making changes. She outlined the new policies, the wage increases and benefits improvements, and cultural shifts. Some people will say I'm being foolish, she continued. Some will say this isn't sustainable. Maybe they're right. Maybe this will fail. But I'd rather fail trying to do the right thing than succeed by exploiting people. She looked directly into the camera. If you're a Canvas Room customer, you're going to see menu prices increase. I'm asking you to accept that increase knowing it means the person serving you can afford to feed their own family. If you're a Canvas Room employee, I'm asking you to hold me accountable to these promises. And if you're someone running a business, I'm asking you to look honestly at whether your success comes at the cost of human dignity. Because it's not worth it. I promise you, it's not worth it. The video went viral. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed millions of times, shared across every platform, dissected by business news and mainstream media alike. The response was mixed and intense. Many people praised her courage, called her a model for ethical business, said this was the kind of leadership the world needed. Former employees came forward with their own stories, validating what Vivian had described. Advocacy groups for workers' rights celebrated the announcement, but there was also fierce criticism. Some called it a publicity stunt, virtue signaling designed to boost her brand. Some said she was being naive, that market forces would inevitably force her to backtrack. Some attacked her personally, digging into her past, her wealth, her privileged background, arguing that she had no right to position herself as some kind of savior. And then there were her investors. 3 of her 5 major investors called emergency meetings, demanding she reconsider. One threatened to sue for breach of fiduciary duty. Another announced publicly that he was divesting from the company because he had no confidence in this new direction. Vivian met with each of them personally. She listened to their concerns. She showed them her projections, her plans, her belief that this could work. Some were swayed, some weren't. In the end, 2 investors pulled out completely, removing significant capital from the company. It hurt. It was scary. But Vivian discovered something surprising. She didn't care as much as she thought she would. The money mattered less than the mission, and if she had to build something smaller to build something meaningful, that felt like a fair trade. The changes rolled out in phases. First came the wage increases, implemented over 6 weeks as Vivian worked with her accounting team to restructure budgets. Menu prices increased by an average of 18%, and Vivian insisted that every menu include a small note explaining why. The people serving you are paid a living wage, and the cost of that dignity is reflected in your bill. Thank you for supporting ethical employment. Customer response was mostly positive. A few people complained, a few stopped coming, but many others praised the transparency and seemed proud to be part of the solution. Some customers started leaving even larger tips, writing notes on receipts that said thank you for doing the right thing, or finally, a restaurant I can feel good about supporting. Next came the benefits overhaul, the emergency fund, the scheduling changes. Vivian hired Jade officially, and together they visited each location, spending time with every employee, listening to concerns, gathering feedback, making adjustments. What they found was a workforce that had been beaten down for so long, they didn't know how to trust that things were really changing. People were skeptical, waiting for the other shoe to drop, convinced this was temporary or conditional. So Vivian and Jade had to earn their trust slowly, proving through consistent action that the promises were real. At the 3rd location they visited, a canvas room in a gentrifying neighborhood on the city's east side, they met a line cook named Jorge Martinez. He was 34 years old, had worked for the company for 5 years, and was one of the most skilled cooks in the organization. But when Jade pulled his file, she discovered he'd been living in his car for 8 months. Vivian sat down with Jorge in the office after his shift. "Tell me your story," she said simply. Jorge was guarded at first, but gradually he opened up. He sent most of his paycheck to his family in Honduras, supporting his mother and 3 younger siblings. He'd been trying to save enough to bring them to the United States legally, but immigration fees and legal costs kept the goal perpetually out of reach. When his roommate had moved out suddenly, Jorge couldn't afford the rent alone. Rather than ask for help or take on another job that would compromise his cooking, he'd been sleeping in his 12-year-old Honda, showering at a gym, and pretending everything was fine. "How is that possible?" Vivian asked, horrified. "How did no one notice?" "I'm good at hiding it," Jorge said with a shrug, "and people don't want to see what makes them uncomfortable." Vivian worked with HR to arrange emergency housing assistance, getting Jorge into an apartment that day. She also connected him with an immigration lawyer who agreed to take his family's case pro bono, and she promoted him to head chef at that location, with a salary increase that would allow him to both support his family and build his own life. When she told him about the promotion, Jorge cried. He tried to hide it, turning away and wiping his eyes roughly, but his shoulders shook, and Vivian simply waited, letting him have his moment. "Thank you," he finally whispered. "You're giving me my life back." "I'm giving you what you should have had all along," Vivian said, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to see." Stories like Jorge's emerged at every location. The single mother hiding her daughter in the storage room during shifts. The dishwasher working despite an untreated broken wrist because he couldn't afford to take time off. The manager skimming tips to pay for his father's dialysis. Each story was the indictment of the system Vivian had built, and each one strengthened her resolve to tear that system down and build something better. 5 months after the initial announcement, Vivian had to make the hardest decision yet. The data was clear. Even with the changes, 2 locations were losing money consistently. They were in expensive areas where the increased labor costs combined with lower customer volume made them unsustainable. She could keep them open by subsidizing them with profits from other locations, but that would put the whole company at risk. She called a meeting with the staff at both locations, explaining the situation with complete transparency. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said. "These locations aren't financially viable anymore. I have 2 choices. I can close them, or I can keep them open and potentially threaten the stability of the entire company. I'm asking for your input. What do you think I should do?" The conversation that followed was painful and beautiful. Employees spoke honestly about their fears, their needs, their hopes. Some argued for keeping the locations open no matter what. Others, surprisingly, said that if closure was inevitable, they'd rather it happen cleanly than drag out. In the end, Vivian made the call to close both locations, but she did it with as much care as possible. Every employee was offered a position at another location, with relocation assistance if needed. Those who didn't want to relocate were given severance packages well beyond industry standard, and Vivian personally wrote recommendation letters for each one. The closures made national news. Critics pounced, calling them proof that Vivian's model was unsustainable, that you couldn't run a business this way. But Vivian refused to back down. In an interview with a major business publication, she said, "We closed 2 locations out of 18. That means 16 are thriving under this new model. I'd say that's a pretty good success rate. And the people who worked at those closed locations were treated with dignity and care. That matters more to me than the optics." Jade, meanwhile, was thriving in her new role. She had a natural gift for connecting with people, for making them feel heard and valued. She implemented monthly one-on-one check-ins with every employee, creating space for them to share concerns or struggles without fear of retaliation. She established a resource network, connecting employees with everything from food banks to therapy services to car repair assistance. And she pushed Vivian constantly, refusing to let her slide back into comfortable detachment. When Vivian wanted to implement a new policy without employee input, Jade called her out. When Vivian got frustrated with the slow pace of change, Jade reminded her that building trust took time. When Vivian started to focus too much on metrics again, Jade dragged her back into the restaurants to talk to actual humans. Their relationship evolved into genuine friendship, the kind built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They had dinner together weekly, sometimes with Micah, sometimes just the 2 of them. They talked about everything, business and family and dreams and fears. Vivian became something like an aunt to Micah, attending his piano recitals and helping him prepare for conservatory auditions. Micah, for his part, was blooming, with consistent lessons from Margaret and the stability of knowing his basic needs were met. His playing reached new heights. He was accepted to 3 prestigious conservatory programs and chose one in the city so he could stay close to Jade. He performed a recital at Vivian's penthouse, a fundraiser for a nonprofit supporting foster youth, and his playing brought the entire room to tears. 1 year after the initial changes, Vivian organized an anniversary celebration at the flagship Canvas Room location. She invited employees from all 16 remaining locations, along with customers who'd been supportive, media who'd covered the story, and advocates who'd championed the model. The restaurant was packed, filled with food and music and laughter. Vivian stood at the front of the room, looking out at faces that had become familiar and dear. "This has been the hardest year of my professional life," she said, "and the most meaningful. We've made mistakes. We've had setbacks. We've faced criticism and doubt and real financial pressure. But we've also built something I'm genuinely proud of, not because it's perfect, because it's human." She gestured to the crowd. "A year ago, I thought success meant expansion and awards and profit margins. Now I know it means looking around a room like this and seeing people who are thriving, not just surviving. It means knowing that the food we serve is created by people who are valued and cared for. It means building something sustainable, not just financially, but morally." Jade joined her at the front, and Vivian put an arm around her shoulders. "This woman saved my life," Vivian said. "I thought I was helping her, but really, she was helping me. She taught me what leadership actually looks like. She showed me that vulnerability is strength and that real change requires us to be uncomfortable. So thank you, Jade, for your courage, for your honesty, for not letting me off the hook." Jade wiped her eyes, smiling. "You're welcome. And thank you for being willing to change, for caring more about doing right than looking right. You've changed my life, and Micah's life, and so many others. That's a legacy worth having." The room erupted in applause, and as Vivian looked around at all these faces, these humans whose stories she now knew, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Fulfillment. Not the empty satisfaction of achievement, but the deep, sustaining joy of purpose. The canvas room model began to spread. Other restaurants started adopting similar practices, citing Vivian's company as proof that ethical employment could work. Labor advocacy groups used her policies as a template for their campaigns. Business schools started teaching case studies about the transformation. Slowly, incrementally, the industry began to shift. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, still financial pressures, but Vivian had learned something crucial. Perfection was never the goal. Progress was, and progress meant showing up every day, listening to people, making adjustments, staying committed to values even when it was hard. 2 years after going undercover in her own restaurant, Vivian was invited to speak at a major business conference. The ballroom was filled with executives and entrepreneurs, people seeking the secret to success. Vivian stood at the podium and told them there was no secret, just a choice. "You can build empires on exploitation," she said. "Many do. It's profitable and efficient, and the market rewards it. Or you can build something smaller and messier and more complicated, something that prioritizes human dignity over maximum profit. The world will tell you that's naive, that it's unsustainable, that it's bad business. But I'm here to tell you that's a lie." She showed them the numbers. 16 thriving locations, employee retention up to 89%, customer loyalty through the roof, profit margins narrower than they used to be, but still healthy, revenue stable and slowly growing, and most importantly, lives changed. People who'd been drowning now building futures, families lifted out of crisis, communities strengthened. "The bottom line matters," Vivian said, "but it's not the only line. And if we're only reading the financial reports, we're missing the most important data. How many lives did we improve? How much suffering did we prevent? How much human potential did we unlock? Those are the metrics that actually matter." The speech went viral, much like her initial video had. And again, the response was mixed. Some dismissed her as privileged and out of touch. Some called her a hero. Most people fell somewhere in between, inspired but skeptical, hoping she was right but not quite believing change was possible. But the people who mattered most, the employees whose lives had been transformed, they knew the truth. They lived it every day. They saw it in bigger paychecks that meant they could afford fresh vegetables instead of cheap processed food, in health insurance they could actually use when their children got sick, in schedules that allowed them to show up for school plays and doctor's appointments, in emergency funds that meant a flat tire didn't spiral into financial catastrophe. Jorge opened a small restaurant of his own, using savings he'd finally been able to accumulate and a small business loan Vivian helped him secure. He hired former canvas room employees and implemented the same values Vivian had taught him. His restaurant became a neighborhood institution, known for incredible food and for treating workers with dignity. The single mother who'd been hiding her daughter in the storage room, a woman named Patrice, used the education benefits to go back to school. She got a degree in hospitality management and became an assistant manager at one of the canvas room locations, then a full manager, then regional director. Her daughter, now 10 years old, wanted to be a chef like the people she'd grown up watching. Stories like these multiplied across the organization. People weren't just surviving anymore. They were building, dreaming, becoming. And Vivian, who'd been so lost and empty 2 years ago, found herself filled with something she'd been missing. Not happiness, exactly. Something deeper, meaning the bone-deep satisfaction of knowing her life was adding something good to the world, of knowing that her success was lifting others rather than crushing them. She still had her doubts, still had nights when the financial pressures felt overwhelming, when she wondered if she'd made terrible mistakes, still faced criticism and skepticism and people waiting for her to fail. But she also had Jade, her voice of truth and conscience. She had her employees, whose loyalty and dedication reminded her daily why this work mattered. She had Micah, whose music filled her apartment with beauty and reminded her that investing in human potential was the highest calling. And she had herself, finally, the person she'd been before success had hollowed her out. The person who cooked because she loved feeding people, who saw food as connection and nourishment rather than commodity. She'd found her way home to that person, and she never wanted to lose her again. On a quiet Tuesday evening, 3 years after everything began, Vivian and Jade sat in a small cafe, the same one where Vivian had first revealed her identity. They ordered coffee and split a piece of cake, falling into the comfortable rhythm of friendship. "Do you ever regret it?" Jade asked. "Going undercover that night? Starting all of this?" Vivian considered the question seriously. "I regret that I needed to go undercover to see the truth. I regret that I built something so broken that people were suffering, and I didn't know, but do I regret what came after? Not for a second. Even closing the 2 locations?" Jade pressed. "Even the investors pulling out? Even all the criticism? Especially because of those things," Vivian said. "Because they taught me what I'm willing to sacrifice for what I believe in. They showed me I'd rather have less and mean more. They proved that I can survive failure if the failure comes from trying to do right." She reached across the table and took Jade's hand. "You know what I regret most? All the years before. All the time I wasted chasing the wrong definition of success. All the people I didn't see because I was too focused on metrics. That's what haunts me, not the risks I took to fix it." Jade squeezed her hand. "You're a good person, Vivian. An imperfect one, sure, but good. And you're doing good work. Don't forget that when the doubts come." "How's Micah?" Vivian asked, changing the subject before she got too emotional. "He's incredible," Jade said, her face lighting up. "Did I tell you he got the scholarship? Full ride to the conservatory for all 4 years. And he's already talking about graduate school after, maybe studying in Europe. Can you believe it? My little brother, who was failing classes and getting in fights 3 years ago, now talking about studying piano in Vienna. I absolutely believe it," Vivian said, "because I've heard him play, because I've seen what happens when people are given the resources to become who they're meant to be. That's not charity, that's just justice. That's the world working the way it should." They sat in comfortable silence, watching people move past the cafe window, each person carrying their own invisible story, their own struggles and dreams and moments of grace. "I've been thinking," Jade said eventually, "about expanding what we do. Not more restaurant locations necessarily, but what if we created a foundation, something that helps other companies implement similar models? Something that advocates for policy changes so this becomes standard practice instead of exceptional?" Vivian felt excitement stir in her chest. "Tell me more." And as Jade outlined her vision, as they sketched ideas on napkins and dreamed about wider impact, Vivian realized this was what success actually felt like. Not awards or money or recognition, but sitting with a friend, planning how to make the world more just, knowing that the work would never be finished, but would always be worth doing. Before we close this story, I want you to hear something important. This isn't just a story about one CEO and one waitress. This is a story about what becomes possible when we choose to really see each other, when those with power decide to use it for elevation instead of extraction, when those who are struggling refuse to stay silent, when we build systems that honor human dignity instead of treating people as disposable. You have power in your own life. Maybe you're not a CEO. Maybe you don't run a company, but you have choices. You choose where you spend your money. You choose how you treat service workers. You choose whether to speak up when you see injustice or look away because it's easier. You choose every day what kind of world you're building with your actions. So here's what I'm asking. If this story moved you, don't just feel something and move on. Do something. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time someone truly saw you when you felt invisible. Or tell me about a time you saw someone else and how you chose to respond. Let's build a community of people committed to seeing and being seen, to treating each human encounter as sacred. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because I'm going to keep telling stories like this, stories that challenge us to be better, to build better, to demand better. And most importantly, share this story. Share it with someone who needs to hear that change is possible. Share it with someone in power who needs to be challenged. Share it with someone who's struggling and needs to know they're not alone. The world changes, one choice at a time. One person seeing another person. One act of courage or kindness or radical honesty. Vivian chose to go undercover and face uncomfortable truths. Jade chose to be vulnerable and tell her story. Together they chose to build something that prioritized people over profit. What will you choose? The story of the canvas room continues. New challenges arise. New employees join with their own stories. New opportunities emerge to expand the model, but the foundation remains the same. See people, value people, build systems that serve human flourishing instead of just extracting human labor. Vivian stands in her flagship restaurant kitchen sometimes, late at night after service ends, and she cooks simple things. The recipes her mother taught her, the dishes that made her fall in love with food in the first place. And she remembers why any of this matters. Not because food is art, though it is. Not because restaurants are profitable, though they can be. But because feeding people, really feeding them in body and soul and spirit, is one of the most fundamental ways we care for each other. She built an empire and almost lost herself. Then she tore that empire down to its foundations and rebuilt it with different values. It's smaller now, less impressive by conventional standards, but it's real. It's ethical. It's something she can pour her whole heart into without reservation. And that, finally, is what success actually looks like. Not perfection, not massive scale, not awards and recognition, but alignment. Living according to your values. Building something you're genuinely proud of. Knowing that your work makes the world slightly better instead of slightly worse. Jade sits in her office, now Director of Employee Wellness for the entire organization, fielding calls from employees who need support, from other companies wanting to learn the model, from journalists wanting to tell the story. She thinks about that night 3 years ago when she was crying in an alley, convinced the world had given up on her. She thinks about how one person's decision to actually see her changed everything. And she commits again, every day, to seeing others the same way, to creating a culture where no one has to cry alone in alleys, where asking for help is encouraged instead of punished, where human struggle is met with compassion instead of judgment. Micah plays piano in concert halls now, his music touching audiences who have no idea about the journey that brought him here. But he knows. Every note he plays carries the memory of his mother, the sacrifice of his sister, the unexpected grace of a stranger who became family. He plays with the depth that only comes from having been broken and rebuilt, and people feel it. They don't know why his music reaches so deep, but they feel it in their bones. This is the ripple effect of choosing humanity. One person's transformation becomes many. One act of courage inspires countless others. One system rebuilt opens possibilities for reimagining everything. So here's how the story ends. Not with happily ever after, because real life doesn't work that way, but with commitment, with ongoing choice, with the understanding that building something meaningful is never finished, never perfect, always requiring us to show up again and choose again and recommit again. Vivian Cross, CEO and founder of the Canvas Room, no longer measures her success by profit margins or award nominations. She measures it by lives changed, by employees who can afford to take their children to the doctor, by families lifted out of crisis, by communities strengthened, by the slow, steady work of building a more just world. One wage increase, one policy change, one moment of genuine human connection at a time. And she knows, with the bone-deep certainty that comes from having lived through transformation, that this is what she was always meant to build. Not restaurants, not an empire, but possibility, hope, a demonstration that another way is achievable. The work continues, the story continues, and you're part of it now, whether you realize it or not, because you've heard this story, you've been challenged by it, and now you have to choose what you do with that challenge. Will you look away? Return to comfortable ignorance? Decide it's someone else's problem? Or will you see, really see, and having seen, will you act? The answer to that question determines what kind of world we build together. Choose wisely. Choose courageously. Choose with your whole heart. And remember, always remember, that transformation begins the moment we're willing to take off our disguises and see each other as we truly are. Struggling, striving, scared, hopeful, human, perfectly, beautifully, irreplaceably human. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Now go build something that matters.